Welcome, everyone. My name is Marc-André Pigeon, or Marc-André Pigeon, and I am the director of the Canadian Centre for the Study of Co-operatives, also an assistant professor in the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I and many of us in this Zoom room are coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, and this is the land of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and it has been for millennia. It's also the traditional homeland of the Métis. So it's important, I think, to express our gratitude for the opportunity to work on this land, share in its bounty, reflect on its beauty, and reaffirm our commitment to the shared, necessary, and important work of reconciliation, both in universities and in the cooperative sector. Now, this commitment to reconciliation strikes me as especially meaningful and relevant today, the day after decisive or divisive, election in the United States, and just a week or two after an almost equally divisive election here in Saskatchewan. So I think the kind of upshot of that is we have work to do on reconciliation with our Indigenous friends, but also others increasingly, and arguably this is where the cooperative model can potentially shine. It's far from perfect, but I'd argue that cooperatives embody something noble about the human condition, shared, namely a need to face adversity together, to find comfort and unity in a shared enterprise, and it's that kind of quality that gives me some hope in a time when hope seems to be in short supply. And so I think that's kind of a nice way to set up my introduction to our speaker, Dr. Thomas Gray, because even though Thomas is not anchoring around this topic, in some ways, what Tom's going to share with us today is about that challenge inherent in getting along inside a cooperative, and how those working together challenges can be compounded by outside factors. So let me say a few words about Dr. Gray. Thomas Gray is a rural sociologist with the Rural Business Cooperative Service at the United States Department of Agriculture. I just learned that Tom is actually in Washington, D.C. That's where his work is. Over the years, Tom's work has touched on many themes core to the study of cooperatives, including member participation, organizational design, and the broader socioeconomic context that gives shape to these issues. Now, in kind of thinking about that socioeconomic context, Tom's work often stretches to consider issues like market concentration, social justice, and something, and I'd be interested if Tom has a chance to unpack this a little bit, agriculture in the middle. Tom has more than 100 published articles, including many with our research center. And just to give you a couple of examples, Tom has a paper called The Agriculture of the Middle Initiative. There's that word, middle again. Pre-mobilizing considerations in formal cooperative structures. Another one, historical retrospective on the conversion and multinationalization of Dakota Growers Pasta Company, a critical discourse analysis. And then, of course, there's his most recent paper published with us, and that's going to be the focus of his talk. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. There's something else you should know about Dr. Gray. He regularly attends and presents at the Canadian Association for the Study of Cooperation conference. In fact, I met him for the first time in person. I saw him sitting there, and I'm like, I think that's Thomas Gray. So I went up and introduced myself, and sure enough, it was. And he was in Montreal at the CAS conference this past summer. So it's always nice to put a face to the name, and to also recognize that while Thomas is based in the United States, he's no stranger to Canadian cooperative sector. So I think he's going to bring a really rich perspective to our conversation. Now, before we hear from Tom, word on our series over the next 15 to 20 minutes, Tom's going to do his talk, maybe a little more. Thomas tells me maybe 21, 22 minutes. And the talk is titled Farmer Stress, Co-op Members, Problematic Solidarity. There's that working together idea, and Recommendations from Dairy. After Tom's done, we're going to play it by ear, but probably we're going to jump right into a breakout conversation for about 15 minutes. We always lose a few people, and I'll be kind of assessing this to see what our attendance is like and whether we do this or not. But if we do a breakout, we always lose a people, but I would encourage you to stick around. It's a really great way for people to connect and to kind of share and to commiserate in some cases. If anyone's experiencing technical difficulties, you can message Stan Yu, and Stan, if you can wave to folks or virtually wave, or
Hi,
both.
everyone.
Thanks, Stan. He's going to be able to help you. I guess almost finally, we're going to be recording this session, And we'll share a link out with everyone who registered for the talk, and that'll happen within a day or two. And of course, we post this to our YouTube channel so you can watch it and share it after we're done. So Tom, that's it. For me. I'm going to pass the puck, as we say in Canada. I'm going to pass the puck to you, and if you can start your slide deck, Stan, for Tom, and we'll get going.
Okay. Well, the title, I'll just start right now. I have a lot of material, so I am going to go a little bit fast. There is a reason why to present the last part as fast. I'll explain that to you. The title is Farmer Stress, Co-op Members, Problematic Solidarity, and Recommendations from Dairy, a Qualitative Analysis. Move, Stan. The next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that I have had this paper presented somewhere else and as co-op members problematic solidarity, but I got feedback that said you have a lot of information here on farmer stress, not farm stress, but farmer stress. And farmers have, and some of this surprised me, I didn't know. Farmers have much higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide when compared to non-farmers and other occupational groups. Move to the next slide, please. So this might give some indication of this. This is, I don't know how you describe this, the pictograph or something. You're seeing the fallout and the displacement of dairy farmers in the United States from 1970 to 2018, and the numbers are 460,000 in 1970 to 40,000 in 2018. I think it's around 37,000 right now. So just to give you an idea, this is a displacement of farms in the United States, dairy farms. So this research, move please. This research examines approximately 1,000 written comments, surveys. It's that little box at the bottom of every mail survey they'll put in if it's a mail survey. Write whatever you want to write in this space, and generally it's never looked at, but I did look at that and organize this paper around those comments. It's a qualitative research or interpretive sociology approach and relies upon reports from direct lived experiences of subjects in their everyday lives. So it's they writing their comments on the survey. Let's say, go to the next slide, please. So care is taken not to reveal identifying information of any organization or individual, but rather to disclose only minimally that our focus is on dairy cooperative members located in the Northwest US. They're all members of the same cooperative. Confidentiality considerations are given greater care due to the degree of market concentration in the US dairy industry. So I'll emphasize this is approximately 1,000 comments, analysis of 1,000 comments, not 1,000 members. It could be more than that, it could be less than that, but I'm working hard not to provide information that you're going to be able to identify what the cooperative is. So move to the next slide. So membership solidarity can often be a key factor in the success of organizational groups and cooperatives. It's generally related to the bonds that link members to each other and to their respective larger group or organizational entity. Move slide. So here's some examples of problematic solidarity between and among members. There are some bad apples among the membership. Smaller farmers need to be listened to more. Class B and Class A producers don't get along so well. Their differences are a problem. Between members and management employees, or between members and the larger cooperative, we're going broke out here while they make a lot of money. There seems to be a lack of appreciation of what it's like on the farm. Maybe they should come out here and run it for me. So the next slide, please. So I do have a degree in social work as well. I looked at the social work literature, and Gitterman and Germain provide an analytic model for sorting out 3 predominant factors related to individual stress. Their work suggestive of factors related to problematic solidarity in an organizational context. Slide. So this is the model, their model, maladaptive transactions, environmental unresponsiveness, life transitions. They're talking about individual life transitions, so I really don't use that section of it, as related to stress. Next slide. They suggest a sociologically informed life model of analysis for parsing out life stressors as enacted upon the individual. Their model has been modified here to contextualize reported frustrations as related to internal cooperative splits and problematic solidarity. Slide, yeah. So there it is again. I'm just reminding you of it. Yeah. So the maladaptive transactions are about communication breakdowns, inconsistent and unrealized expectations, and I'll give you comments on each of these. Exploitive relationships, environmental unresponsiveness, it's organizational unresponsiveness, social system unresponsiveness, and market historical changes, looking at market structure, farm structure, cooperative structure, rather than individual life changes. But I do present this in not a categorical way. It'll be obvious when we get to this, what I do with this. It's a little different from what you might expect. Next slide. So no, I will go over the first two categories of the model fairly quickly, giving some examples of comments for each one, but hopefully spending proportionately more time on the experiential impacts of historical change on farmer members. And with this everyday history, we seek to specify a worldview of farmers under an increasingly industrialized, globalized regime, some refer to as a productionist regime, centering as much as possible on the affective experience of members as embedded in the written comments. And I also rely on my own experiences in the dairy farming community. Next slide. So just, I think people know what I mean when I say productionist, agriculture, large capital production units, heavy reliance on non-renewable resources, reliance on speed, volume, mechanization, chemicalization, but also, next slide, a path dependence, that once you're in this sort of regime, past decisions are heavily influenced by future decisions. They become dominant and reinforcing. They're locked in by sunk investments. So it's hard to get out of this sort of paradigmatic agriculture that you're in when you're in a productionist agriculture. Next slide, please. So just reminding you of that, the loss of farming. Next slide. So looking at communication breakdowns, if we could move to the next slide. So there's some examples that were written comments. Cooperative policies need to be explained. Need information on what the goals are. We're not being informed. How the heck can we manage our dairies if we don't know what we're being paid for? I don't understand how my milk check is determined. Tell it like it is. Don't sugarcoat it. Next slide. So moving to changing and inconsistent expectations. So this is really based on understandings of cooperatives. For example, typically members understand that members own the cooperative and that it's organized for their use. Management and employees work for the members. However, it's difficult for some members to understand that management and employees may have higher incomes or more stable incomes than members. Hence, we hear comments such as cut management pay and clean out the deadwood at headquarters. Next slide, please. So then move to exploitive relationships under the maladaptive transactions. If we move to the next slide. Some members felt the relationship within the organization was so lopsided and unfair, there was a perceived sense of being exploited. All these fees and deductions were too trusting. We're being taken advantage of. We're not being paid for our butter fat. What the heck is going on? Cooperative policies shift whether there's competition in the area or not. Next slide, please. So communication breakdowns, oh, sorry, I just wanted to jump to the next place there. These malfunctions can threaten the cooperative's ability to provide member service and use through time. If service provisions fail or expectations of service suggest failure, then members question the reason for their participation. Next slide. So then we move from the maladaptive transactions to environmental unresponsiveness and to organizational unresponsiveness. Members need the dairy cooperative to accept all of their milk production. There's a great fragility of milk. And so there's what's needed is a guaranteed market. You don't want to pull up to the processing plant and they send you home. It's called sell it or smell it. You have to sell it, and that gives the processor tremendous power over the farmer. So a guaranteed market is part of the deal if you're producing fluid milk. So, and also they need the co-op to sell and the milk and the milk products in the larger marketplace for the highest possible price, and to provide services and materials that support and help maintain the farm operation. So these are expectations that are kind of basic to what milk is. Next slide. So here are some examples of complaints about in this area. We're trying to survive out here. What to do with the excess milk? There's not good marketing. There needs to be more benefit for producers. We never see our field person, and they don't know the industry in and out like they should. Next slide, please. And the regional and national politics are a problem. Such as labor reform, trade, taxes, health insurance, milk prices, environmental regulation, water rights. So they feel overregulated. Next slide, please. So you get comments like, if prices don't improve soon and regulations burdens continue to eat us up, we're going to have to just quit dairying. And most farmers don't want to get out of dairying, given farms oftentimes have been in families for generations. I have a colleague who just recently, there was a farmstead in their family since the mid-1600s, if you can believe that. That's a heritage farm. But the family farm, my own experience growing up was that that family farm may be run by and operated by a particular part of the family, but the extended family also has a lot of emotional connection to that farm as well. You know, I was a cousin. I went to a lot of actually different farms. There's a lot of shame involved in losing the family and the family's possessive farm. Next slide, please. So looking at the summary of the unresponsive environment, there has been a gradual emptying out of mid-size family-oriented farms. Stress and frustration are likely high for surviving farmers witnessing these displacements. Solidarity among members and between members in the organization then suffers. Next slide. I just want to remember you of that diagram. Next slide. So in this third section of the paper, a summarization of the written comments is presented in a context of the macro historical factors. That's the third factor. And seeking to specify a worldview from the perspective of those doing family scale dairy farming. Next slide, please. You don't really need to know that. It's just from a view from the basis of the farmer on the farm family on the farm. Next slide. In emphasizing historical tendencies, I also draw upon my own experiences growing up in a village of 80 people surrounded by dairy farms in upstate New York. Next slide, please. So dairy cooperatives had been a predominant form of milk assembly processing in the area. Next slide. So looking at the macro historical changes, next slide. From the individual member's perspective, most members producers don't operate at the level of the organization. They function on the farm. Their task is to produce at a level that maintains or enhances their lifestyle as dairy farmers. But many are caught in a treadmill bind. As individuals, the more they produce, the lower the price in the aggregate. Next slide. The lower the price, the smaller their profits, the more burdensome their debt. The smaller the return, the greater the need to expand production. This double binding nature of dairying becomes reflected in farmers' views and opinions about the world, showing up, and remember, I'm trying to explain farmer stress, showing up in written comments as a series of oppositions between the farmer and the cooperative, the farmer and the larger social formation, and among farmers. See Figure 9. You can pass through that. I just want to remind you of it. So Figure 9 presents some of the oppositions dairy members face in their daily experience. So go to the next slide. And this is where I'm really presenting the historical basis in which, on an everyday way, farmers have to deal with this kind of pressure. So I'm going to read this, and it's a little disorganized, but I'm trying to portray what it's like on the farm facing these dilemmas, seeking to say something about the felt experience on the farm with the farm potentially at risk. Remember, I'm looking at suicide, depression, anxiety, affects of farmers on these farms, which tends to get forgotten in social analyses. If people may remember, there was a movie several years ago named Dancing as Fast as I Can. I thought about retitling this Milking as Fast as I Can. So when farmers receive low prices for milk, they tend to behave rationally as individuals and either produce more milk to raise their incomes, try to find ways to reduce expenses, and or direct their energies to some other more profitable outlet, off-farm jobs, for example. They often work long hours, at least 6 days a week, to produce more for less per unit expense. Herds are milked twice or 3 times a day, 7 days a week. Expenses, when and if covered, leave very little disposable income. Scale is increased, cows are added, machinery gets larger, more complicated, volume climbs, loans are secured to cover increased costs, but returns remain small. Members see retail prices for milk in grocery stores and restaurants and wonder, where does the money go? Input prices increase 300–400% historically, yet producers' milk prices rise slightly, stay stable, or decline. If the co-op plant they regularly send milk to has closed, they must ship their product to more distant locations. Many feel attached to their local cooperative they may have had a hand in organizing. As members of a cooperative, certain expectations are set up in place. Cooperative principles suggest members' rights of control, influence, and equal treatment. Yet while farmers go broke or nearly so, the cooperative, though stressed, may stay solvent. Managers work for the producer owners, yet generally have higher and more stable salaries. Farmers are told they're being paid a certain price, but the cooperative retains some of it for several years to sustain the business. Many expect to have strictly held equal treatment, but find different farmers receiving different prices depending on where they live, how much milk they produce, and what their milk contains. These experiences counter their hard work on the farm and some of their expectations of cooperatives. On the farm, they are in a position of power. I'm talking about the daily existential experience of a farmer on the farm. If a job needs to be done, they go do it. As one farmer commented, they're out in the elements, they have huge jobs to do, and they go do them. However, when confronted with the market, the individual is as powerless off the farm as he or she is powerful on it. In a context of seemingly giving everything and receiving little while working effectively on the farm doing chores, a human tendency is to assign blame. If problems off the farm are not being solved and farmers feel certain they're not, it's considered due to negligence or exploitation. From this setting, issues of equality and lack of perceived fairness become more focused. Grade A producers see themselves as subsidizing grade B producers, and vice versa. Large and small volume producers look at another in similar fashion. Directors' competence is questioned, term limits are suggested. As a collective, cooperatives are an offset to the individual powerlessness. However, excuse me, to remain solvent themselves, cooperatives have merged, made acquisitions, innovated products, penetrated markets. The cooperative can then be considered too large, a big business, too far from the farm. sometimes seen as eliminating important local competition. While all members may benefit locally in aggregate from a merger or acquisition or from market functions performed, individuals may experience lower prices and less service. What might have happened had a merger not occurred is difficult to assess, particularly when bills are coming due. Opposition to big business is sometimes matched with anti-big government. Government is seen as distant, meddling, controlling, and doing too little or not doing enough. Conceiving of themselves as the backbone of the economy, producing food and fiber, and centered to its health, members feel mistrustful and personally victimized within what has become a national and global economy, an economy over which they have little to no influence individually. So go to the next slide, please, Stan. Out of this frustrating double binding experience, solidarity can collapse, and members may write such comments as get rid of the CEO, large producers are getting away with sending contaminated milk, many of you have never worked on a farm in your life, yet you continue to get high salaries, small farms aren't efficient, neither are large farms, Class A producers exploit Class B producers. Next slide, please. So this overview reflects a logic of frustration that exists among members and some of the historical transitions they have had to endure and seek to adapt to in an everyday sense. Next slide. Understanding this drama of farm loss as members witness bankruptcies and sellouts of relatives and neighbors as they experience their own solvency problems then provides a context to any member comment. Next slide. So I have then a series of recommendations to try to address difficult life. And they're written in inversions from the comments emphasizing the importance of listening and finding likeness or mechanisms for building trust and minimizing perceived distance in an organizational context. So go to the next. So these are all the recommendations. Let members know they are heard by discovering and eliminating barriers, improving communication and listening skills, arrange meetings at convenient times, encourage broader participation, provide broader recognition, mitigate insider or outsider feelings with recognitions. Next slide. Help members understand cooperatives enable farmers to act collectively, but in the context of a complex globalized economy. Educate members to the reality that cooperative needs to be healthy financially. Next slide. Take complaints of exploitation seriously and investigate them, make corrections if needed, and follow up with the complainants. Develop more context between management and members. Publish management employee profiles that highlight ag and rural backgrounds to reduce a sense of difference and improve familiarity. Encourage corporate level management to attend local meetings, even if on an infrequent but regular basis. Next slide. Communicate and educate members on how decisions on mergers are considered and enacted. Educate members on the reality of the market for hired management. It's not the same as the market for milk. Next slide. This is number 11, which is not in the report. Consider trade-offs between traditional productionist farming rationales and various alternatives or mixed alternatives, such as those found within the Agriculture of the Middle initiative. That's the link to that. So including institutional food service, cooperative marketing organized around niche value products, institutional food service, restaurant agriculture, farm to school supplies, things like that. That's it. How'd I do? 25 minutes? No, those are your questions.
All
So
right. Well,
I know
thanks. Go ahead, Thomas.
it's not a usual academic paper, I know.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Thomas. I find this fascinating, and I think there's a good conversation to be had. We don't have that many people here, so I think we'll just open it up to kind of a plenary conversation, if I could put it that way. Does anyone want to take a first crack? I mean, I have my own questions, but we can open it up first to folks who may have a burning desire to jump in.
Now,
Well,
I'm curious how many people are familiar with ag co-ops.
yeah, I mean, I think just looking at the audience here, quite a few are. Thomas, I have
Good.
one question that kind of was in my mind the whole time I was reading your paper, and I think you mentioned it briefly in a couple of instances. But in Canada, of course, the milk sector is supply managed, and it just strikes me that, and then the farmers are really defensive of that. The people who are in the supply management system. It strikes me that that system, at least notionally, helps manage some of these anxieties, some of these concern issues that you've raised here, and often they do have co-ops sitting in that space as well. I'm just wondering if that conversation ever comes up in the U.S. and what are people's thoughts about that?
I don't know a lot about that part of it in terms of policy, but I think there would be, there's international trade issues as well, which,
Right.
I think that when you're talking about farmers in rural areas in the United States, there's a very heavy individualist way of being, and that supply management from and the way you're speaking of it would not be welcomed. That they do buy into this productionist way of being and supply management. How are you going to do that? I am familiar that a larger dairy co-op, which is not in existence anymore, was going to do that. We're going to try to do that. But then how do you, is there some sort of quota that, the last 3 years of production, and then we let you produce according to what your production average was over the last 3 years, and the farmers were not, the management actually suggested this, and the dairy farmers themselves were not interested in it at all. It feels too controlling and top down to them,
Right.
and really goes against the sort of American Gothic ethic of being a farmer in the United States. So I think there's a sort of ideological resistance to even entertaining the idea about how it would be done.
Right.
So that's a problem. And in writing the paper, and then you want to question, I did wonder about, it's maybe a related question of providing a guaranteed market, because what that encourages is it's a commodity, and so the logic is to produce massive amounts of the commodity, and you get paid for that commodity. And it's milk, and so you have to have some guarantee that the cooperative is going to accept that milk, sell it or smell it. So it almost serves, or does serve, the guaranteed market does serve a kind of deepening of the productionist rationale. It encourages more and more production because you're guaranteed a market, and the answer to your financial problem is to produce more. You get paid for the volume. Of course, there are the dairy sector has been good in developing value-added products as well.
Right. Okay. So
at the co-op level.
Right. Right. Yeah, let's see if anyone wants a question. Please put your hand up, virtual or physical, and we can put your.
My friend Michael Gertler's here.
Yeah, and Michael, I thought Michael might have a question. Go ahead, Michael. Oh, you're muted, Michael. There
Sorry,
you go.
I only have a few questions, and I'll try and choose one or two. Thank you, Thomas. Very interesting. To my mind, it sheds some light on the sort of changing culture of agriculture and of cooperatives. and it helps us to sort of see under the hood or behind the barn or whatever as to what's actually going on. And it's a very interesting analysis of, you know, what are tantalizing individually comments, but when you put them together in a framework, seem to tell a story, and it's an interesting story. Uh, Wendell Berry had this quip, that ever since the Mayflower, farmers have been confronted with the question of whether to have the neighbor or have the neighbor's farm. And this sort of competitive ethos, which is overlaid the cooperative ethos that some farmers, try and be part of too. So we've got all of that. But I'm very interested in whether, the co-ops are able, and it's a bigger question, to sort of communicate with farmers that they're making tough choices, not only about mergers and technologies and markets and so on, but about organizational forms. And you get this sort of organizational drift towards the standard corporate form. But I'm wondering whether there are any alternatives. When you look at AgroPure up in Quebec, or if you look at Organic Valley or whatever, do they have they experimented with different models of cooperation in the sense that maybe it creates a better connection between members and directors and members and management and so on? And I'm just wondering if you're aware of variation in the cooperative sector and even the dairy cooperative sector in terms of how they manage these organizational development issues and the resulting feelings of members towards each other and the management.
Well, it varies depending on how financially stressed the co-op is. Of course, a lot of co-ops, one of the principles is having education and extension of the education, but that can get very thin when margins are thin. Of course, there's a centralized, top-down kind of organizational structure, or the membership structure. There's a local where the annual meetings are held. It varies in terms of how often, and then there's the federated, where it's made up of a bunch of locals. It can be mixed, but so in the paper I wrote some years ago now on organizational design, I did suggest that in terms of pursuing democratic organization and trying to ensure some kind of voice, that while at the same time having to meet scale issues, but also local identity issues, those things are very valuable, local identity and branding, that the federated model really fit better than a centralized model, which was, from my perspective, was less democratic. But there is always this issue of being bureaucratic and becoming bureaucratic and people being lost in the bureaucracy. So the small local just can lack the volume of really being able to compete. The federation is an offset to that. But there is some questions of how, you're always running into the economic efficiency issues as a federation competing against a centralized dairy cooperative that doesn't have to deal so much with the governance issues of it. But sure, I mean, the three sort of traditional standard forms are local, centralized, and federated. Federating, I like that model because it does integrate various other aspects. You don't lose the local identity of an organization with size. But it can get cumbersome.
Michael,
because it's a large.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom. Finish your thought.
Well, this is a large bureaucratic organization. The more you have, the larger the organization, the more bureaucratic it is, and you lose all of the sort of distancing that you develop all the distancing that occurs in a bureaucratic organization. But I would argue that the federated is more representative, democratic, and locally embedded than the centralized, but it's not as responsive to local individual organizations, but they also have issues of scale.
So, Michael, I'd like to come back to you because I'm sure you have a follow-up, but we have Quentin Fox here, who's with a dairy organization here in Canada. I'd love to get Quentin to share some thoughts, reflections, if you're comfortable with that, Quentin.
I
There he is.
I am. So yeah, Tom, thank you for the presentation. I've just been scanning quickly your paper as well. So I'm a director of training and development for a large dairy cooperative in Ontario in the eastern half of Canada. We have 1,300 plus members, and very interesting in terms of we work in a supply managed industry, so that has some benefits and some constraints. So I certainly appreciated hearing your comments in relation to the kind of American ideology in relation to the idea of any form of government control. So I'm going to stay away from that subject area in general.
Well, I am curious, can I ask you a question? How do you manage that at the local farm level? Do you just give them a quota of how much milk they can produce?
We Gately Foods has no input in terms of what the quota is for dairy farmers. It would be through the provincial organization, and it is quota based, and it is done over as you said, kind of sometimes a 3-year rolling average, sometimes a 5-year rolling average, and it depends. It's about having that balance. We kind of call it the 3 legs of the stool between what the consumer needs, what the processors need, and what the farmers need. So trying to find that balance, and that's never easy. I also come from the UK as well, where I also worked in ag and saw the end of that version of supply management in the UK, and over the 15 years or more since then, 20 years now, an exodus of 30,000 farmers out of the industry. So and that story in itself in relation to the dairy co-op movement, it's a long and tortuous path that they went down. But I think that the piece I was interested in is that, one, I'd love to hear more, and I haven't got to it in your paper yet, but the kind of range of co-ops that you looked at from, size and complexity of, say, Dairy Farmers of America, to the smaller ones, and kind of were the issues similar? And I realize
Yeah, it's a good question. It's only this is only a single co-op where all of those comments came from, and so didn't look at the range of size to see what that would mean. It'd be very meaningful to have that data. What's the qualitative difference between a smaller local cooperative and a large centralized cooperative? Yeah, absolutely. That wasn't this study. They all were members of the same co-op. So that's a limitation of the study.
Yeah.
And I was really trying, somewhat pulling from my own experience growing up in the farming region in upstate New York, and a tremendous displacement of dairy farms, and what is the toll on the farmers on those farmsteads. And given, really, I wasn't aware of the statistics on the high suicide and depression rates. You hear about it, but I didn't know it was so high.
Yeah.
So I did those comments and edited those comments, and having within me as well a kind of social work vein, one of 25 degrees, one of too many degrees. I did have a kind of affective experience of recording those comments and having a sort of removed but kind of firsthand experience of how painful it really is to be trying to be a dairy farmer under those kind of productionist kind of pressures. So I was trying in that paper to relay that to the reader in terms of, this is difficult stuff. And, also some ag econ, there's a lot written on farm stress and trying to keep farmers and farms in business with the farm stress literature, but there's not a lot of attention paid to the human cost of the displacement of those farmers off their farms. So that's really where my focus was in trying to do that. I've done other work on organizational design, and in fact, I presented that at CASC, and the choices that are available in terms of the micro-organizational structure of things, that's all on the internet. So, it's a terrible dilemma, really, in terms of being in the place where dairy farmers have had to be over the years in the terms of the productionist dynamics, and also having the heartfelt embeddedness of being a dairy farmer.
Yep. I can only say I echo those comments, and again, my experience being in the UK 20 something years ago, watching foot and mouth and seeing whole herds done away with, the toll on mental health and has only increased, whether here in Canada or in the UK. I'm interested in just hearing a little bit more commentary in how you see the nature of the relationships between the co-op and the members. For some of our members, it is only an investment. They see it as a financial measure to invest in the cooperative and get good returns. Others is a plan B if and when supply management ever ended in Canada. And that is, being a member of a cooperative like Gailey Foods, where we process a large part of our members' milk, and could, in the event of an end of supply management, not that we hope it does happen at this point, that there would be a home for the milk. But also then there is the training, development, the opportunity to get involved in the governance processes and the like. That also for a relatively significant number of our 1,300 members, that is an important piece for them as well. That's the kind of, as our board would call it, the secret sauce of the membership relationship that they have with their producers. So I just wanted to get a perspective from you, how you see the nature of those relationships operate within the study you did, and how you would describe them.
Well, there's always the dynamic and the pressure. We're in it to, increase our income on the farm. And always has to be the case for a farmer. I mean, to stay in business, they have to make a return. And there is a variability in how interested farmers are interested in attending meetings or running for office. And the more institutionalized it becomes, the less important that is for many farmers. The pressure is to try to stay in business as best as we can. So if the participation is good, if they come to meetings and they serve on boards of directors, and then they're involved in the decision making, and then the commitment is high. Also, but generationally, it also makes a difference too. Was it my grandparents that helped form the co-op? There's that whole dynamic there. Yeah. So it's not easy to state a generalization. It's why participation, the education things are so high, but it's highly variable. Some people, if they don't attend, they don't attend. They never will attend. I'll find, if someone can make me a better deal, I'll go take my milk there if it's available. So it's highly variable in terms of commitment and participation. Once you're participating, then there generally is good commitment. So you have to get broad-based participation, and then you get commitment. But there's still all the pressure at the same time from the productionist end of things. That pressure is still constantly there. How are we going to stay in business? And I'm not making any money. I got to I got to get the neighbor's farm. I mean,
Mm.
he's going out of business, right? So it's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of human costs, which I don't think is given enough attention to.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from folks? Make sure other folks have a chance to. If we have time for one or two more questions. Don't see any hands going up. Michael or Quentin, do you have a follow-up? I have a couple myself, but I want to make sure you guys have a chance.
I guess I got one question, Tom, and it just a kind of purely out of interest because you referenced obviously the mental health toll. Is there any role that the co-op is playing itself in addressing it, supporting it, or is it saw in there were a number of organizations you listed, and it's Gailey Foods has looked at the mental health toll. We've run education sessions and the like to help build awareness, reduce the taboo, the stigma. But we also don't see ourselves in the role that we're there to provide ongoing mental health services. I just wondered whether what you saw is it remaining as a taboo itself.
I'm the taboo of mental health treatment. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
It's better than it used to be. In some places, it's kind of chic if you're in therapy. I'm an analysis. I'm not aware of co-ops that really are organizing them in a way that they would be directly involved in mental health. However, there is a real sociologist, Bill Heffernan, who he's not in the field so much anymore because he's aging, where he did look at depression levels among farmers. He was in Missouri, the state of Missouri. Now, a tangential kind of thing, not what you're asking, is that it's very tangential, is the number of injuries that occur on farms, particularly to children. So that there is, I saw a number just recently, there are 1 in 3 fatalities of children on farms. They're 1 every 3 days. Let me get this right. There's 1 fatality every 3 days. It's actually a little more than that. Fatalities on U.S. farms in the United States, 1 every 3 days. So there is some interest. Someone or a couple of people, one at Ohio State, one at Penn State, to look deeper into this and to see what the availability of childcare is in rural areas and how co-ops and rural electrics are doing some stuff on this in terms of getting children off of farms and in safe places. So it's not exactly what you're saying, but there is a public health issue here with that, like mental health.
No, that's that's an interesting place where we talk about from cradle to grave in terms of the role that co-ops can play in society and obviously on behalf of their members as well. So no, I appreciate giving me that insight.
Listen,
can you just email me so I have you as a resource? I'd like to talk with you more.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. You can via Marc-Andre. You should be able to,
I'll happily pass with Quentin's permission. I will. Yes.
Yeah, no, I have no problems at all. Happy to chat further.
Thank you so much, Quentin, and for that interjection. I just love that practitioner perspective. Tom, we're just about at time, so I'm gonna start wrapping up. I probably have 1,000 questions. Michael, do you have a really quick one, or are you good?
I'll defer. Yeah, I'll defer. But I'll now go read the paper and assign it to my students.
There you go.
Very useful. It's a very useful seminar.
It's a great outcome.
I love
Tom Gray, the author, regrets not putting the 11th recommendation in the paper, which is alternatives to productionist agriculture.
Yeah.
Right. Make a note of that, Michael.
That's a PS. That's a PS.
I thought this was a really interesting paper, and I really want to make sure Tom had a chance to share it more widely on this forum. And so thank you so much, Tom. Thank you all for
Thank you.
attending. I'm just going to say a few quick wrap-up comments. Our next co-op conversation is Wednesday, December 4th. We're going to have Raphael Ziegler, an associate professor at HEC Montreal Business School. And he's going to talk about his views on the alignment between the cooperative sector and the circular economy, this concept that's kind of floating out there about, thinking less linearly and more circularly about the economy. We also have a Freudian lecture coming up with our very own Aileen Jorge Coto, one of my graduate students, and her talk is titled Analysis of the Government Relations Function Between Credit Unions and Farm Credit Canada. So a little bit of a farm theme. And then we're going to be, on December 5th, we're going to be hosting Dr. Joseph Heath from the University of Toronto, who has a book called Cooperation and Social Justice. I think it's going to be a really provocative talk, and if you're around, come and check it out in person or online. And that is it. Thank you all for attending today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.